Welcome to The Explainer. I am so incredibly excited you're here today because we're looking at something you almost certainly have sitting in your medicine cabinet right this very second: acetaminophen. It is quite literally the most common yet surprisingly mysterious drug we take.
Seriously, think about this for a second. What drug is an active ingredient in over 600 different medicines, yet we still don't fully understand how it works? It's absolutely staggering, right? We pop these pills for headaches, fevers, random aches and pains, usually without a second thought. But this completely ubiquitous drug actually hides a massive, unexpected scientific blind spot. As we're going to see today, the exact way it works in the human body is still a subject of active, ongoing debate among scientists.
Section 1. A surprising chemical history. Okay, let's dive right into this, because the story of how acetaminophen ended up in almost every home in America is a fascinating tale of trial, error, and honestly, some pretty risky side effects along the way.
So acetaminophen was definitely not an overnight success story. Way back in 1877, a chemist named Harmon Northrop Morris first produced it over at Johns Hopkins University. But it wasn't clinically tested right away. Medical attention kind of shifted elsewhere. Then, in 1893, Joseph von Mering was testing another leading painkiller of the era, a drug called phenacetin. Well, Mering made a really critical observation. Phenacetin caused a condition called methemoglobinemia. Now that's a massive tongue twister of a word, but what it chemically means is that it severely limited the transport of oxygen to cells in the body. Obviously, depriving your cells of oxygen is definitely not something you want from your headache medicine. Yet, surprisingly enough, phenacetin remained heavily used all the way until 1949, and that is when two biochemists, David Lester and Leon Greenberg, made a huge breakthrough. They discovered that the human body actually metabolizes phenacetin directly into acetaminophen. But more importantly, they proved acetaminophen was just as effective, it completely avoided that dangerous oxygen-limiting condition, and it wasn't carcinogenic, whereas phenacetin actually was. That one monumental discovery essentially skyrocketed acetaminophen to absolute dominance.
Section 2. The NSAID imposter. Now that we've got the history down, we really need to shift gears and define what acetaminophen actually is, or, well, more accurately, what it isn't. Guys, acetaminophen is an imposter. Most of us just casually lump acetaminophen, which is known as Tylenol in the US and Paracetamol basically everywhere else, in with NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, stuff like ibuprofen or aspirin. But while it does effectively reduce fever and increase your threshold for painful stimuli, it is actually not a true NSAID. Why? Because it has little to absolutely no anti-inflammatory activity. True NSAIDs possess strong anti-inflammatory activity, which makes them fantastic for chronic anti-inflammatory conditions, like rheumatoid arthritis. Acetaminophen, on the other hand, only very, very weakly inhibits the cyclooxygenase enzymes, the ones that produce the prostaglandins responsible for pain, fever, and inflammation. But here's the crazy part. This weakness? It's secretly its superpower. Because it doesn't act like a true NSAID, it completely avoids producing those blood-thinning or gastric side effects. And that is exactly why it's the go-to safe choice prescribed for kids and certain adult populations, like asthmatics, who might have really bad reactions to aspirin.
Section 3. The missing mechanism. And this brings us to the real core mystery of this explainer, the mechanism of action.
I really want you to stop and think about this for a second. How does acetaminophen actually produce its pain-relieving effects? We take it by the literally billions of doses every single year. You would naturally think the science is entirely settled by now. But incredibly, modern science is still largely guessing. The exact mechanism remains unproven.
So here is what the leading researchers currently suspect. We basically have two main theories. Theory 1 focuses heavily on the brain and the central nervous system. The idea here is that acetaminophen might just be way better at inhibiting those cyclooxygenase enzymes, specifically inside the central nervous system. But why? Well, because those sites have a much lower concentration of compounds called peroxides. See, peroxides are produced at inflammation sites in the rest of your body, and they actively block acetaminophen from working well. So, lower peroxides in the brain basically means acetaminophen can actually do its job up there. Then we have theory 2, the elusive COX-3. Some scientists suggest acetaminophen inhibits a completely different, hypothetical third cyclooxygenase enzyme, appropriately called COX-3. Now, here's the catch, and it's a huge one. While we know humans possess the gene that encodes this third enzyme, absolutely zero studies have demonstrated its actual expression or function in humans. None. So we are essentially relying on a ghost enzyme to explain how a drug works that we might casually swallow on a Tuesday afternoon. It's wild.
Section 4. The toxic tipping point. Okay, this is where we have to shift our tone a little bit.
Because while acetaminophen is generally incredibly safe, it operates on a very, very strict biological budget. Let's take a look at the severe biochemical consequences of taking high doses. First up, we need to completely understand what a healthy, normal liver does with a safe dose. It uses a process called conjugation. I want you to think of conjugation like a super safe, highly efficient metabolic conveyor belt. The acetaminophen enters the liver and it immediately gets chemically coupled to an additional molecule, specifically molecules of sulfate or glucuronide. This covalent binding essentially increases the drug solubility, which means your body can safely and easily wash it away and excrete it. That right there is the happy, healthy path.
But let's see how this builds into a seriously deadly cascade when things go wrong. If you take too much acetaminophen, step 1 happens. You totally overload and saturate that normal conjugation pathway we just talked about. The conveyor belt gets backed up. Step 2, the liver basically panics and shunts the excess drug into a completely different pathway, metabolizing it via oxidation by a specific liver enzyme called CYP3A4. And step 3 is where disaster really strikes. When CYP3A4 metabolizes the drug, it accidentally creates a highly toxic product called NAPQ. Now, your body actually has a built-in defense for this, which leads us right to step 4. It requires a specific molecule called glutathione to safely conjugate and excrete the toxic NAPQ. But here's the problem. High levels of the drug completely wipe out your stored reserves of glutathione. And finally, step 5. Without that protective glutathione shield, that highly reactive toxic NAPQ is just let loose. It covalently binds to and totally disrupts other vital proteins in the liver, which leads to massive, potentially fatal liver dysfunction. It's a very precise and very dangerous cascade.
Section 5. The real-world warning. Understanding that biochemistry is absolutely crucial. But we need to bring this back to everyday life. Because it's not just about how many pills you're swallowing. It's about what else is actively happening in your body when you take them.
So, the crucial point is that certain lifestyle factors act like a massive multiplier for that toxic cascade. First, take fasting or malnutrition. If you haven't eaten all day or you're malnourished, your body naturally depletes its protective glutathione stores. And remember, glutathione is literally your main defense against that toxic NAPQI. So taking acetaminophen on a totally empty stomach means your liver shields are already down. Another major factor? Consuming alcohol. This is a complete double whammy. Alcohol strains the liver generally, for sure, but worse than that, it actually induces or physically increases the amount of those tricky CYP3A4 enzymes. More of those enzymes means your liver is actively generating even more of the toxic NAPQI product from the acetaminophen. This is exactly why reaching for Tylenol to cure a rough hangover can be so incredibly dangerous for your liver. You are literally walking a delicate chemical tightrope.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. Knowing this delicate chemical tightrope your liver has to walk just to keep you safe, and knowing that modern science still doesn't even fully grasp the elusive mechanisms in the brain that make it work, how are you going to view the most common pill in your medicine cabinet tomorrow? It is a truly powerful testament to the fact that our everyday biology is still deeply mysterious and honestly, deeply fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.